Today we're unboxing an iPhone 7 Plus that should be running its original software version, iOS 10. Usually I'm only into collecting devices on their original software up to iOS 9, but the 7 Plus was pretty cheap on eBay, so I went for it. Okay, so it came with a USB to Lightning cable. I'm pretty sure this is non-Apple. And here is the iPhone, so it looks like to be in pretty good condition so far. And we do have the rose gold color here. Yeah, the condition on this iPhone looks to be fantastic. I'm not seeing any dents or wear on the corners, and only really light surface scratches on the display. Okay, let's see if the device has any battery power. And we do. And okay, we are met with the iOS 10 home screen. So when I saw this listing on eBay, there were several things that clued me into this being iOS 10. The first of which was the wallpaper. This green wave was the default wallpaper for iOS 10. The second of which was the battery indicator in the top right. There is a very thin outline on this, and this was changed in iOS 11 to have a thicker outline. Third was the fact that this dock had labels for the applications. These were removed in iOS 11. So let's head into settings and see specifically what version of iOS 10 we're running. Okay, looks like we are on 10.3.2, and this is a 128 gigabyte device. Let's check out the wallpapers available for iOS 10. So we have several different colors for the dynamic wallpapers. So the dots on these dynamic wallpapers would kind of move as you would tilt your device. The regular selection of wallpapers for iOS 10 was a little bit boring in my opinion, but there were actually some exclusives for the iPhone 7 series. So these three kind of like orbs here on this second row were exclusive to the iPhone 7s. We also retained the kind of beta fish live wallpapers from the iPhone 6s. So these wallpapers used Apple's 3D Touch or Force Touch technology, which has since been removed from iPhone. But basically applying stronger force to the display would make these photos move. And 3D Touch was present in all sorts of different places across the UI. So you could 3D Touch on applications for extra options. You could also 3D Touch on the edge of the display to access multitasking. And one of my personal favorites, you could 3D Touch on the keyboard and kind of move your cursor around. And speaking of 3D Touch and other haptic feedback, the iPhone 7 featured the first solid-state home button on an iPhone. So similar to the Force Touch trackpad on newer MacBooks, the iPhone's home button simulates a click with vibrations. And you could choose from 3 different levels of intensity for that home button haptic feedback. iOS 10 featured a pretty unique control center. So since it's the first time I've opened it here, it's kind of instructing me how to use it. This version of Control Center was unique because it featured 2 panes. One was for your music, and one was for your regular controls. In iOS 11 and newer, Apple went to a full-screen control center that's still very familiar to what we use today. Early versions of iOS 10 had the old-school Videos app, but newer versions had the new Apple TV app. iOS 10 was the first version to include the Home app by default, and you could use this to connect your smart home devices. And sadly, iOS 10 was the first version to remove the slide to unlock feature. It was replaced with press home to open to allow for this new widget view upon a swipe. The iPhone 7 is probably most famous for what it removed, and that was of course the 3.5mm headphone jack. And in the keynote event for the iPhone 7, Apple famously cited the reason courage for doing this. Thankfully in the box they did include a set of earpods with a lightning connector, and they also included this lightning to headphone jack adapter. But as we all know, Apple's real motivation for removing the headphone jack was to boost sales of the wireless AirPods. The iPhone 7 featured a more refined antenna design, with the lines curving around rather than going straight across like the 6S did. The earpiece at the top of the device now acted as a speaker for much improved audio quality. And the iPhone 7 Plus was the first device to feature 2 rear cameras. The 2 rear cameras allowed for a new zoom lens. That second camera also allowed for the first implementation of portrait mode. iOS 10 actually refers to portrait mode here in beta. So portrait mode would blur the background of your photos. So as you can see here, I ended up with a decent blur effect for the background of this photo. Of course the effect wouldn't be perfect, but it kind of emulated a DSLR quality photo. There were actually 6 color options for the iPhone 7 Plus during its lifetime. You could get the rose gold like I have here. You could also get a regular gold, a silver, a black, a very unique jet black color. That color had a very polished black look, and unfortunately it would scratch very easily. And then in spring 2017, Apple added a product red. And the product red for the iPhone 7 Plus was actually really unique. It had an all red back panel, but was actually paired with a white display. I believe this was the only product red iPhone to ever have a white bezel. And you would almost expect the home button ring on that red model to be red, but it was actually silver. Another cool feature of the iPhone 7 Plus is that these were the first iPhones to be IP67 water resistance rated. I remember seeing a lot of cool ads at the time about the water resistance of these devices. So that pretty much wraps up my look at this iPhone 7 Plus running iOS 10. This isn't exactly the first device that comes to mind when I think about vintage iPhones, but it's still really neat to have because this was the first iPhone to feature 2 cameras, and it was kind of infamous for deleting the headphone jack. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.